The air in the cathedral was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume. It's funny how flowers for a wedding smell exactly like flowers for a funeral. I stood there, wrapped in $6,000 of Vera Wang lace, looking into Kenji's eyes. He looked perfect. His tuxedo was tailored to the millimeter, and he had that soft, "I'm the luckiest man alive" smile plastered on his face. Behind him, May, my maid of honor, was pretending to wipe away a stray tear. My heart wasn't racing. It was cold, a dead, heavy lump in my chest. The priest reached the part everyone waits for, the speak now or forever hold your peace moment. Usually, it's just a formality, a beat of silence before the I do's. But I didn't wait for the priest to finish. I felt the small plastic remote hidden in the folds of my bouquet. My thumb found the button. "Wait," I said. My voice wasn't a scream. It was a whisper that cut through the room like a razor. The music stopped. The 300 guests, CEOs, family elders, the creme de la creme of our social circle, all leaned in. Kenji blinked, his smile faltering just a fraction. "Hana? Honey, what are you doing?" I didn't look at him. I looked at the massive 20-foot LED screens we had installed for the tribute slideshow. "I think we should see the real tribute first," I said. I pressed the button. The screen didn't show our engagement photos in Kyoto. It didn't show us laughing at the beach. Instead, a grainy, night vision video filled the cathedral. It was Kenji's apartment, the one he told me he'd sold 6 months ago. And there was May. She wasn't wearing her bridesmaid dress. She was wearing my mother's heirloom pearls, the ones that had gone missing from my safe 3 weeks prior. The audio kicked in. The acoustics of the church made Kenji's voice sound like the roar of a monster. "How much longer do we have to play house with her?" May's voice asked on the tape. "Just until the ceremony," Kenji's voice replied. "The moment the papers are signed, the trust fund triggers. Her father set it up so it's community property upon marriage. We get the payout. I file for a mental health separation in 90 days, and we walk away with $4 million. She's too proud to fight it in court. She'll just want us gone." Then came the sound of them laughing, a wet, cruel sound that echoed off the stained glass. The cathedral went deathly silent. I turned to look at Kenji. The perfect man was gone. His face had turned a sickly shade of gray. Next to him, May was shaking so hard her bouquet hit the floor with a dull thud. But let me back up, because to understand how I stayed calm enough to ruin their lives in front of everyone they ever loved, you need to know how they thought they had already ruined mine. To understand how deep the knife went, you have to understand the pedestal I put Kenji on. I wasn't some naive girl looking for a fairy tale. I'm a lead software architect. My brain is wired for logic, edge cases, and failure points. I analyze systems for a living, and yet Kenji managed to bypass every firewall I had. We met at the Summit of the Future in San Francisco. I was presenting a paper on decentralized security protocols. I remember the heat of the stage lights and the sea of nameless faces in the auditorium. After I finished, while I was packing my laptop, he approached. He didn't lead with a cheesy line. He didn't compliment my looks. "Your third slide," he said, leaning against the mahogany podium. "The one about the vulnerability in legacy banking API. You assumed the attacker would come from the outside. But what if the attacker is already inside the house? What if they have the admin keys?" I looked up. He was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than my first car. He had this calm, centered energy. Kenji Tanaka. That was the first time I heard his name. He was a partner at a boutique private equity firm. Over the next 3 months, he didn't rush me. We had coffee. Then we had dinners that lasted until the staff started putting chairs on the tables. He listened. That was his greatest weapon. He listened to me talk about my father's struggle as an immigrant building a logistics empire. He listened to my grief over my mother, who died of a sudden stroke just as I was finishing my master's at Stanford. He didn't just listen, he took notes. He learned my triggers. He learned that I valued loyalty above everything, because, in my world, money was common. but trust was a rare currency. May was the second pillar of my life. If Kenji was the future I was building, May was the past that anchored me. We were 5 years old when we met in a sandbox in San Jose. Our parents were friends, part of the same tight-knit Japanese-American community. We grew up like twins. When my mother died, May didn't just come to the funeral. She moved into my guest room for a month. She cooked the meals I forgot to eat. She answered the sympathy cards when my hands were shaking too much to hold a pen. "I'll always be your sister, Hana," she told me back then. "Your blood is my blood." When I started dating Kenji, May was my biggest cheerleader. "He's the one, Hana," she'd say while we sipped wine on my balcony. "He looks at you like you're the only star in the sky." I felt like I had won the lottery. I had the perfect career, the perfect best friend, and the perfect partner. My father, a man who smells like old tobacco and expensive leather and who trusts no one, finally gave his blessing. "He has a good foundation," my father told me during a walk in our garden. "He understands our history. He doesn't just want your hand, Hana. He wants to protect our legacy." We spent hours planning our future, not just the wedding, but the life. We talked about buying a vineyard in Napa. We talked about how we'd merge our expertise, my tech and his finance, to create a venture capital fund that focused on ethical AI. He made me feel like we were a team of two against the world, but the architecture of trust is a fragile thing. If you build it high enough, you don't notice the cracks forming at the base. You're too busy looking at the view from the top. I remember the night we got engaged. We were in Koho during the cherry blossom season. He took me to a private tea house that had been in his family for generations. The air was cool, smelling of damp earth and matcha. He got down on one knee, and the ring, a 4-carat Asher-cut diamond, sparkled in the dim lantern light. "Hana," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I don't want to just be your husband. I want to be your sanctuary. I want to build a world where you never have to worry about being alone or being betrayed. Will you let me carry the weight with you?" I said yes. I cried. I called May immediately. She screamed into the phone, sounding more excited than I was. "I'm already planning the bachelorette party," she laughed. "Only the best for my sister." For a year, that was my reality. I was living in a masterpiece. I didn't know it was a set. I didn't know the walls were made of cardboard, and the family tea house was a short-term rental he'd paid for with a credit card he hadn't yet defaulted on. I was so blinded by the light they were shining on me that I couldn't see the shadows they were casting behind my back. Kenji began to integrate himself into my father's business. He'd spend weekends at my father's estate, helping him optimize his offshore holdings. He was so helpful, so diligent. He suggested that for our wedding gift, my father should set up a special trust, a unity fund. "It's not for me, sir," Kenji told my father while I watched from the doorway. "It's for the children, to make sure that whatever happens in the market, Hana and our future family are untouchable. I'll even put in my own seed capital from my firm's year-end bonus." My father, moved by Kenji's selflessness, agreed. The trust was drafted, $10 million, 5 from my father and 5 that Kenji promised to transfer upon the signing of the marriage certificate. I felt so protected. I felt like the luckiest woman on earth. I was a software engineer who prided herself on seeing the bugs in any code, but I was staring at a massive system-wide virus and calling it a feature. May, meanwhile, became my wedding coordinator. She had access to my passwords, my schedules, and my house keys. "You're too busy being a genius," she joked. "Let me handle the boring stuff." The boring stuff included my bank statements. The boring stuff included my mother's jewelry box. The cracks were there. I just chose to call them reflections. When Kenji would disappear for late-night meetings with investors, I told myself he was working for our future. When May started wearing a new Cartier watch that she found at a vintage shop, I was happy for her. I was the administrator of my own destruction. And the most terrifying part, I was enjoying every second of it. The betrayal didn't arrive with a bang. It arrived like a slow leak in a basement, silent, damp, and destructive long before you smell the mold. Once the Unity Fund was drafted, the atmosphere in my house shifted. It was subtle. A cold front moving in so slowly you don't think to grab a coat. Kenji started with my memory. It's a classic tactic, but he executed it with the precision of a surgeon. I'd come home from a 10-hour shift at the lab, my brain fried from debugging thousands of lines of code, and he'd ask me about the contract I supposedly promised to sign. Hana, babe, we talked about this on Tuesday, he'd say, leaning against the kitchen island with a glass of red wine. The vendor for the floral arrangements needs the signature by midnight or we lose the deposit. I told you 3 times. I'd frown, rubbing my temples. Tuesday? I was in back-to-back sprints on Tuesday, Kenji. I don't remember you mentioning the florists. He'd sigh, not an angry sigh, but a disappointed one. The kind that makes you feel like a burden. You were sitting right there, honey. You even said the peonies were too expensive. Are you okay? Maybe you're pushing too hard at work. Your father was saying you looked scattered. That was the hook. Bringing my father into it. He knew that my father's respect was my oxygen. By suggesting that my father was noticing my decline, Kenji made me defensive and insecure. I started second-guessing everything. Did we have that conversation? Did I agree to transfer the $20,000 deposit for the lighting? I checked my sent emails. Nothing. I checked my call logs. Nothing. You probably did it from your work laptop and forgot to sync. May would chime in the next day, dropping off a green smoothie that tasted like grass and chalk. You've been so forgetful lately, Hana. Last week you left your keys in the front door all night. I had to pull them out for you. I stared at her. I did? Yeah. I didn't want to worry you, but maybe Kenji is right. You're glitching, babe. Even the best hardware needs a reboot. I wasn't glitching. They were gaslighting me in tandem, a coordinated strike on my sanity. May was the one who left the keys in the door. Kenji was the one who deleted the browser history on my home computer. They were creating a narrative of a high-powered woman losing her grip under the pressure of a fairy tale wedding. Then the financial bleed began in earnest. It started with the wedding spreadsheet. We had a shared Google sheet. I'm a data person, so I checked it weekly, but suddenly the numbers weren't adding up. $5,000 for custom invitations, $10,000 for security consultation, $8,000 for Line sourcing. When I flagged the charge, Kenji had an answer for everything. The invitations are hand-pressed in Italy, Hana. You said you wanted quality. The security is because your father is a high-net-worth individual. We can't be too careful. He was using the wedding as a giant laundry machine. Every time I questioned a cost, he'd turn it into a fight about my trust issues. He'd walk out of the room, leaving me feeling like a cold, heartless accountant who didn't care about our special day. I found myself apologizing to him. I was apologizing to the man who was currently using my credit card to pay for May's luxury apartment lease. One night, I woke up at 3 a.m. The bed was empty. I walked down the hall and heard Kenji's voice coming from the office. He was on the phone. His tone was different, sharp, aggressive, devoid of the soft husband-to-be warmth I was used to. I don't care about the risk, he hissed into the receiver. Once the marriage certificate is filed, the trust triggers automatically. The bank doesn't even call her. It's a legacy account. Just keep the creditors off my back for another month. Tell them I'm about to marry $10 million. My heart stopped. My skin went clammy. I stood in the shadows of the hallway, frozen. Tell them I'm about to marry $10 million. He didn't say he was marrying Hana. He was marrying a number. The next morning, I tried to bring it up. I tried to be calm. Kenji, who were you talking to last night? I heard you in the office. He didn't even flinch. He just kept buttering his toast. I was on with Tokyo, Hana. The market opening. My firm is looking at a rough quarter. I didn't want to stress you out with it. You mentioned a trust fund, I said, my voice trembling. He stopped buttering. He looked at me with a gaze so cold, it felt like a physical weight. Hana, this is what I'm talking about. You're hearing things now. I was in bed by 11. I didn't go to the office once last night. I saw you, Kenji. You had a night terror, he said firmly. You've been having them. You are talking in your sleep again. I didn't want to wake you because you've been so fragile. He walked over and tried to hug me. I pushed him away. I felt like I was losing my mind. Was I? I looked at the office door. It was closed. Had I dreamt it? The medication May had recommended, the herbal sleep aid, was making my dreams incredibly vivid. That afternoon, I went to the jewelry box. My mother's pearls, the 1920s Mikimoto strand, were gone. My heart plummeted. Those weren't just jewelry. They were the only thing I had left of her voice, her scent, her life. I called May, hysterical. The pearls are gone. Someone was in the house. Hana, honey, calm down. May's voice was soothing, like honey laced with arsenic. You didn't lose them. You gave them to me to take to the jeweler for restringing. Remember? For the wedding? I paused. I did? Yes, at lunch on Friday. You said you wanted them to be perfect for the ceremony. Gosh, you really are working too hard. Do you want me to bring over some of those relaxation drops? I sat on the floor of my closet and cried. I felt like a broken machine. I felt like my brain, the one tool I had always relied on, was betraying me. I didn't know that May had sold those pearls 48 hours prior to pay off a gambling debt to a bookie in Atlantic City. I didn't know that Kenji had spent the previous night not in the office, but in May's bed, laughing about how easy I was to break. They were building a cage out of my own insecurities. Every time I tried to reach for the truth, they'd tell me my hand was shaking. Every time I saw a red flag, they told me I was colorblind. The gaslighting was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. They didn't just want my money, they wanted to erase me. They wanted the Hana, who was a lead engineer and a billionaire's heir, to disappear, replaced by a hollowed-out, medicated version of a woman who would sign anything just to make the confusion stop. I remember looking at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked sunken. I'd lost 10 pounds. I looked like a ghost. And Kenji would stand behind me, hands on my shoulders, whispering, "You look beautiful, Hana. Just a few more weeks, and we can leave all this stress behind. Just us and the money. And our love." He almost slipped. He was getting arrogant. He thought the game was already won. He thought I was too far gone to ever reboot. But there's one thing about being a software architect. We are trained to look for the silent error. The one that doesn't crash the system immediately, but leaves a tiny 1-pixel trail of corruption in the logs. And that night, while they thought I was drugged and dreaming, I found the first pixel. The pixel that broke the simulation was an old iPad Pro. I had bought it for Kenji a year ago for his birthday, but he'd complained the screen was too small for his complex financial modeling. He'd tossed it into a junk drawer in our shared home office, claiming he'd wiped it and would give it to his nephew. For months, it sat there, buried under old charging cables and empty fountain pen boxes. But on a Tuesday night, the kind of quiet, humid night where every floorboard creak sounds like a gunshot, I couldn't sleep. The herbal drops May gave me were sitting on a nightstand, but for the first time in weeks, I hadn't taken them. I wanted to feel the sharpness of my own anxiety for once. I wanted to know if I was still in there. I went to the office to find a spare USB-C cable. I started digging through the junk drawer, and there it was, the iPad. I pressed the home button, expecting a hello screen or a passcode prompt I didn't know. It slid open. Kenji hadn't wiped it. He'd simply signed out of his main iCloud and thought that was enough. But he'd forgotten one thing. The device was still logged into a legacy backup account, a burner email he used for his less-than-legal private equity dealings. And because it was still connected to our home Wi-Fi, it had been silently syncing his messages and photos for months. I sat on the floor, the cold light of the screen reflecting in my eyes. My heart was thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. I opened the Photos app first. The first image was a screenshot of a bank statement. My bank, but it wasn't a statement I'd ever seen. It was a transfer log from my wedding fund. There were 12 transfers, each for exactly $9,999. I knew why. Anything $10,000 or over triggers an automatic federal reporting requirement. He was peeling my skin off, one $9,999 strip at a time. I scrolled. My breath hitched. There were photos of May, not best friend photos. These were taken in a hotel room I recognized, the one in Vegas where we'd gone for my engagement celebration. While I had been asleep in the next room, exhausted from the travel, Kenji had been with her. In the photo, May was laughing, holding a glass of Cristal, and wearing my mother's Mikomoto pearls. She was naked, except for my family's history draped around her neck. The caption Kenji had written under the photo in his hidden notes app read, "The ATM is finally paying out. She thinks she lost them. God, she's so easy to break." I felt a surge of bile in my throat. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run into our bedroom and tear his eyes out. But the admin, in me, the girl who spent nights at Stanford debugging kernel panics, took over. Emotion is noise, I told myself. Data is signal. I opened the Messages app. There were hundreds of threads between Kenji and a contact saved only as M. Meters. Did she take the drops? Kenji. Yeah, out like a light. She's getting more paranoid every day. Mentioned the missing money again. I told her she's having night terrors. Meters. Perfect. My lawyer says if we can get a doctor to sign off on persistent delusional disorder before the wedding, we don't even have to wait for the divorce. You get full guardianship. We can sell the San Jose house by Chris. One thing in one time I saw with Kenji, I love it when you talk dirty. How's the apartment? Meters. Love it. Hana's credit card paid for the new sofa today. She's literally subsidizing our honeymoon. I sat there for 3 hours. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I watched the entire architecture of my life crumble in 12.9 inches of retina display. They weren't just stealing. They were planning to delete me, to put me in a facility, drug me into silence, and spend my father's hard-earned, well, I did beg my father's hard-earned legacy on Napa wine and Vegas suites. Kenji had inserted a clause. Section 12.4, written in dense legalese that I'd previously skimmed. It stated that in the event of medical incapacitation of either spouse within the first 12 months, the other spouse would have unilateral, non-revocable control of the trust's assets to ensure continuity of care. It was a death warrant. But then I found the smoking gun, a PDF file labeled Project Phoenix. It was a pitch deck. Kenji was using my father's business secrets, proprietary logistics algorithms I had written myself, to solicit bridge loans from some very shady offshore groups. He was selling my intellectual property on the black market to pay off his gambling debts, promising the lenders that he would control the source me after the wedding. He didn't just want my money. He had sold my brain. As I sat there, the sun began to peek through the office blinds. I heard the floorboards creak in the hallway. Kenji was waking up. I acted on instinct. I turned off the iPad, shoved it back into the bottom of the junk drawer under the cables, and stood up. I grabbed the random USB cable and walked into the kitchen just as Kenji entered, yawning and looking every bit the perfect husband. "Hana, you're up early," he said, his voice scratchy with sleep. He walked over to kiss my forehead. Every fiber of my being screamed to recoil. to claw his face, but I stood still. I let his lips touch my skin. I felt the coldness of a dead thing. "Couldn't sleep," I said, my voice remarkably steady. "Just looking for a charger. My phone died." "You look better today," he said, squinting at me. "Here, maybe those herbal drops are finally working. Maybe," I said, forcing a small, fragile smile. "I think I'm finally starting to see things for what they really are." He smiled back, a shark-like grin that didn't reach his eyes. "That's my girl. We're almost at the finish line, Hana. Just 2 more weeks. Then we can be happy." 2 weeks, I repeated. "I can't wait." I went to my home office and locked the door. I didn't call the police. The police are for simple crimes. This was a system-wide breach. And as any good architect knows, when your system is compromised, you don't just patch the hole, you build a honeypot, you let the intruders think they're winning, you let them dig deeper into the network, feeling safe, feeling arrogant. And then, once they've committed fully, you trigger the self-destruct. I opened my laptop, my encrypted work laptop, and began to type. Log 01. The objective is no longer survival. The objective is total scorched earth liquidation. I had 14 days. I spent the first 6 hours of that day setting up a mirror of my bank accounts. I created a fake digital trail that showed my trust fund was maturing faster than expected. I wanted them to see a bigger prize. I wanted them to get greedy. I wanted them to stop being careful. Then I called my father. Not on his cell. I knew Kenji might be monitoring the family plan. I called him on his old-school landline at the office. "Dad," I said when he picked up, "I need you to listen very carefully. I need you to hire a forensic accountant, a private investigator, and the meanest litigation lawyer in the state of California. And Dad, don't tell Kenji. From this moment on, he's not my fiancé. He's the target." My father's voice was like gravel. "What did he do, Hana?" "He tried to play the architect," I said, looking at the wedding invitation on my desk. "But he forgot who wrote the code. The shadow war had begun. For the next 2 weeks, I would be the perfect victim. I would take the drops and spit them into the sink. I would act confused. I would let May comfort me while she wore my stolen jewelry. I would be the ATM one last time. But on that wedding day, the withdrawal was going to be in blood." The hardest part wasn't the investigation. It was the acting. To pull off a counter-strike of this magnitude, I had to become the very thing they thought I was, a broken, confused, and compliant woman. Every morning for the next 10 days, I woke up next to a predator and smiled. I let him brush a strand of hair from my face. I let him call me sweetheart while my skin screamed for a shower. I became a master of the spit and sink. Every night, May or Kenji would prepare my relaxation tea with those herbal drops. I'd take a sip, wait for them to look away, and then head to the bathroom to dispose of the liquid. Then I'd emerge, rubbing my eyes, acting groggy. I'd slur my words slightly. I'd forget what we had for dinner. I watched the light of triumph grow in Kenji's eyes. He thought he was winning. He thought he had successfully lobotomized the smartest person he knew. While I played the victim at home, my father's cleaners were working in the shadows. I had a secure, encrypted line to the private investigator, a man named Miller who looked like a high school history teacher but had the soul of a bloodhound. We met in the back of a nondescript dry cleaners every 3 days. "You were right about the holding company. Kilometers Global," Miller said, sliding a dossier across the table during our second meeting. "It's a shell. But it's not just for your money. Kenji has been using it to funnel kickbacks from your father's logistics competitors. He's been selling them your shipping route optimization data. He's not just a thief, Hana. He's a corporate spy." I looked at the photos. Kenji meeting a rival CEO in a dark corner of a hotel bar. May depositing envelopes of cash into a safe deposit box. But then Miller showed me something that made my stomach do a slow, sickening roll. "This is May's medical history," Miller whispered. "Or rather, her lack of one. She hasn't been going to those fertility treatments she told you about. She's been visiting a luxury realtor in Cabo San Lucas. They've already put a down payment on a villa. The closing date? 3 days after your wedding." They weren't even planning to stick around for the mental breakdown phase. They were going to trigger the trust, drain the cash, and vanish to Mexico, leaving me drugged and institutionalized in a facility where the continuity of care clause would prevent my father from intervening easily. I felt a cold, crystalline rage harden inside me. Let them buy the villa, I told Miller. In fact, help them. I want them to feel so secure that they stop looking over their shoulders. I went back to the honeypot. I told Kenji I wanted to streamline the wedding finances. Kenji, love, I said over breakfast, acting slightly dazed. I'm having such a hard time keeping track of the vendors. Why don't we move the rest of my personal savings, the $500,000 in my liquid account, into the joint wedding fund? It'll make it easier for you to pay the final bills while I rest. I saw the hunger in his eyes. He almost choked on his coffee. That's a very sensible idea, Hana. Very mature. It'll take the pressure off you. He didn't know that the savings I was moving were actually tied to a high-interest private loan I'd opened in the name of his shell company, Kilometers Global. I'd used my power of attorney, which he'd so graciously helped me set up, to sign him as the primary guarantor. By moving that money, I wasn't giving him a gift. I was handing him a ticking financial time bomb. The moment the wedding failed to produce the trust fund payout, the creditors for that loan, a group of very aggressive private lenders, would come for him with the force of a hurricane. Meanwhile, I had to deal with May. She came over to help me with my final dress fitting. She stood behind me in the mirror, pinning the Vera Wang lace, her hands moving near my throat. You look like a doll, Hana, she whispered. So perfect. So still. I feel like a doll, May, I replied, looking her dead in the eye through the reflection. I feel like I don't have to think at all anymore. Isn't that what you wanted? She paused, a flicker of suspicion crossing her face. For a second, the mask slipped, but I quickly let my gaze drift, looking unfocused again. She chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. I just want you to be happy, babe. You've earned this. She was wearing my mother's pearl earrings, not the Mikimoto strand. I knew those were gone, but each being as that shape no bore. I had replaced the real ones in my jewelry box with high-quality fakes months ago, just to see if she'd take the bait. She had. She was literally wearing stolen goods while helping me prepare for the happiest day of my life. I spent the final 48 hours before the wedding in a state of hyper-focus. I was a general preparing for a siege. I coordinated with the AV team at the cathedral. I told them I wanted a special surprise for Kenji, a tribute video. I gave them the thumb dive. They thought it was a montage of our love story. I also met with my father's lawyers. We prepared the nuclear option. We filed a preemptive fraud suit in a different jurisdiction, one that would be unsealed the moment the ceremony began. We also contacted the SEC regarding Kenji's private equity firm. We didn't give them the full story yet, just enough of a tip to ensure a raid was scheduled for the Monday after the wedding. On the night before the wedding, Kenji tried to be romantic. He brought me a glass of champagne. To ours, Hana, to the beginning of our real life. I watched him take a sip of his own glass. I held mine up, the bubbles dancing in the light. To the truth, Kenji. May it finally come to light. I didn't drink. I waited until he went to the bathroom, and then I poured the champagne into the soil of a potted palm. The plant would be dead by morning. A fitting omen. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't sad. I felt like a surgeon about to remove a tumor. There would be blood. There would be a mess. But when I woke up, the infection would be gone. I thought about my mother. I thought about the pearls she'd worn on her own wedding day, the pearls May had sold for a few $1,000s and a weekend in Vegas. I whispered a promise to her in the dark. I'm going to get them back, Mom, and I'm going to make sure they never hurt anyone else. When the sun rose on the morning of the wedding, I stood up and looked at the dress. It was white, pure and blinding. It was the perfect shroud for the man I was about to bury. I called May. "It's time," I said. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, babe," she chirped. "I've got your medicine ready. You're going to have the most peaceful day of your life." "Oh, I'm sure of it," I said. I've never felt more awake. The cathedral was a masterpiece of architectural irony. High vaulted ceilings, stained glass that painted the floor in shades of ruby and sapphire, and the heavy, reverent scent of incense and expensive orchids. It was a place designed for eternal vows. I stood at the heavy oak doors, the weight of the Verawang lace pulling at my shoulders, feeling like a soldier stepping onto a battlefield. My father took my arm. His hand was a rock. He didn't say a word, but he leaned in close enough for me to smell the faint hint of his sandalwood cologne. He squeezed my elbow, a silent signal. The trap is set. Pull the trigger. The music began, the traditional canon in D. Every step I took down that long, white-carpeted aisle was a countdown. To my left and right, I saw the faces of the people who made up my world, my mentors from Stanford, my board members, family friends who had known me since I was in diapers. They all smiled, their eyes misty with the beauty of the moment. They saw a princess. I felt like a ghost, and there he was, Kenji, standing at the altar, looking like the hero of a blockbuster movie. He had that practiced look of overwhelmed joy, his eyes shining with what anyone else would call love. To me, it looked like the shimmer of oil on water. Next to him stood May, my maid of honor, holding my bouquet of white peonies as if it were a sacred relic. She winked at me, a tiny conspiratorial gesture that said, "We did it, babe. You're finally under control." I reached the altar. Kenji took my hands. His palms were warm. Mine were like ice. The priest began the liturgy. It was a drone of ancient words that meant nothing to the three people standing in the center of the storm. I watched Kenji's face. He was nodding at the right times, playing the part of the devoted groom to perfection. "If any person can show just cause why they may not be lawfully joined together," the priest intoned, "let them now speak, or else, hereafter, forever hold their peace." The traditional pause followed. The room was so silent you could hear the flickering of the votive candles. This was the moment. I didn't wait for a guest to stand. I didn't wait for a dramatic entrance from a secret witness. I simply let go of Kenji's hands. The movement was so sudden, so sharp, that Kenji blinked in confusion. "Hana," he whispered, his voice barely audible under the vaulted ceiling. "Honey, what's wrong?" I didn't answer him. I reached into the hidden pocket I'd had the seamstress sew into the layers of my silk tulle. My fingers closed around the small, black, plastic remote. "I think," I said, my voice projecting with a clarity that shocked even me, "that before we proceed, we should acknowledge the real foundation of this union." I didn't look at the guests. I looked directly at the AV booth in the back. I pressed the button. The massive LED screens, which had been softly displaying a welcome to our wedding graphic, flickered and died. A second later, they roared to life with a high-definition video feed. The first thing the guests heard wasn't music. It was the sound of a heavy door closing. Then, the grainy but unmistakable interior of May's secret apartment. The gasps from the pews were like a wave hitting a shore. On the screen, Kenji and May were visible on the sofa. They weren't discussing floral arrangements. "She took the dose," Kenji's voice boomed through the cathedral's state-of-the-art sound system. "She was practically drooling by 10 o'clock. I don't know how you stand being around her when she's that pathetic, May." "I don't mind," May's voice replied, followed by the clink of wine glasses. "The more pathetic she is, the easier it is to get her signature on the power of attorney." "Have you checked the trust fund triggers today?" "It's all set," Kenji said, leaning back. "The second the priest says I pronounce you, 5 million hits the kilometers global account. I've already messaged the broker in Cabo. We're leaving her in that wellness retreat in the hills. Let the doctors deal with her delusions for a year while we're on the beach." The video cut to a close-up of May holding up my mother's Mikimoto pearls. She laughed, a sharp, jagged sound that filled the holy space like a curse. To Hana, she toasted, "The best friend a girl could ever rob." The cathedral exploded into a roar of whispers and outraged shouts. My father's brothers were already standing. Kenji lunged for me. His face had transformed. The mask of the perfect husband had shattered, revealing a frantic, cornered animal. Hana, stop this. It's a trick. Someone is trying to ruin us. I stepped back, and two of my bridesmaids, women I had hired from a private security firm, stepped between us. They didn't look like bridesmaids anymore. They looked like statues. It's not a trick, Kenji, I said, my voice cold and steady. It's the logs. I'm an architect, remember? I always keep a backup. I looked over at May. She was white as the lilies in her hand. She tried to drop the bouquet and slip away through the choir entrance, but Miller, my private investigator, was already standing there, flanked by two uniformed officers. The pearls, May, I said, pointing at her neck. She was wearing them under her maid of honor dress. I knew it. She couldn't resist the trophy. I'll be taking those back, along with everything else you've stolen over the last 20 years. I turned back to the audience. My father was standing at the foot of the altar. He didn't look shocked. He looked like a king watching a traitor be executed. The reception is canceled, I announced to the room. But the bar at the St. Regis is open on my tab for anyone who wants to celebrate the fact that I didn't marry a parasite. I looked at Kenji. He was shaking, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit, a lie, a way out. Oh, and Kenji, I added, leaning in close so only he could hear me. The $500,000 I moved into the joint fund yesterday. It wasn't my savings. It was a bridge loan from the Vancini Group. I signed you as the sole guarantor using your kilometers global credentials. They expect repayment by Monday. Since the trust fund isn't triggering, I'd suggest you start running. Those men don't use lawyers. The blood drained from his face until he looked like a corpse. He knew the name. Everyone in private equity knew the Vancini Group. They weren't a bank. They were a collection agency for the underworld. You bitch, he hissed. No, I said, handed my ring, the 4-carat diamond he'd bought with a stolen credit card, back to him. I'm just the administrator, and your access has been revoked. I turned my back on him. I didn't run. I walked. I walked down that long, white aisle, past the crying relatives and the stunned colleagues. I walked out of the heavy oak doors and into the bright, clean sunlight of a Saturday morning. Behind me, the cathedral was a den of chaos. I could hear the shouting, the sound of May being led away in handcuffs, and the panicked voice of Kenji trying to explain the unexplainable to my father's lawyers. I reached the bottom of the steps, where a black town car was waiting. Not the flower-adorned limo we had booked. My car. Why life? Miller walked up to me, handing me a small velvet pouch. He'd retrieved the pearls from May's neck before the police took her in. What now, Miss Tanaka? He asked. I looked at the pearls in my palm. They were cool and heavy. I looked at the dress, now stained with the dust of the cathedral floor. Now, I said, I go to the office. I have a system to rebuild. As we pulled away, I looked back one last time. I saw Kenji being shoved into the back of a police cruiser for questioning regarding the corporate espionage. He looked small. He looked like a bug under a microscope. The architecture of my life had been destroyed, but the ground was finally clear, and I was the only one with the blueprints for what came next. The aftermath was not a single explosion, but a series of controlled demolitions. When you pull the cornerstone out of a structure built on lies, the gravity of the truth does the rest of the work for you. I didn't have to lift another finger. I just had to sit back and watch the physics of their own greed crush them. Kenji's fall was spectacular, because I had unsealed the fraud suit and tipped off the SEC simultaneously. His private equity firm was frozen within 48 hours. The investors he had been courting, the ones he promised my father's logistics secrets to, realized they had been sold a holotype dream when they found out the Unity Fund was never coming. They didn't just walk away. They sued him for every cent he didn't have. But the real kicker was the Vancini loan. Because Kenji had been so arrogant, he'd signed the guarantor documents without reading the predatory clauses I'd hidden in the fine print. The interest rate doubled every 48 hours after a missed payment. By Tuesday, he owed nearly $1 million. By Friday, he was homeless. He tried to flee to his parents' house in Seattle, but my father's lawyers had already filed a lien on any property associated with his name. He ended up in a dingy motel near the airport, calling me from a burner phone, begging for mercy. "Hana, please," he sobbed into the receiver. "I'll give you everything. I'll sign a confession. Just tell the Vancini people to back off. They're following me. I can't sleep." "Kenji," I said, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new office. "You told me I was having night terrors, remember? Maybe the men following you aren't real. Maybe you're just scattered. Have you tried those herbal drops May liked so much?" I hung up. I never heard his voice again. Last I heard, he was serving a 5-year sentence for securities fraud and identity theft in prison. A private equity background doesn't get you much respect. It just makes you a target. May's fate was slower, a lingering rot. She thought her sisterhood with me would protect her from the full brunt of the law. She was wrong. My father, who had once treated her like a second daughter, became her most relentless prosecutor. He used every ounce of his influence to ensure the DA didn't offer a plea deal. She was charged with grand larceny and possession of stolen property. The luxury apartment I'd subsidized for her was liquidated to pay back the funds she drained from my accounts. All those designer bags, the Cartier watches, the silk dresses, they were sold at a public auction. I bought back my mother's Chanel bag for $100 and burned it in my backyard. I didn't want the energy of her touch in my house. May spent 18 months in a women's correctional facility. When she got out, the socialite life she had craved was a smoking crater. No one in our community would speak to her. Her parents, shamed by the public revelation at the cathedral, moved back to Japan and changed their phone numbers. She works as a night shift clerk at a 24-hour pharmacy now. She spends her breaks looking at the lifestyle section of magazines, seeing the world she almost stole, knowing she'll never touch it again. As for me, the reconstruction began the day after the wedding. I didn't take a sabbatical. I didn't go on a healing journey. I went to work. I took the Unity Fund, the real one, which my father had kept safe, and invested it into a new venture, Sentinel Systems. It's a cybersecurity firm that specializes in internal threat detection. We help high-net-worth families and corporations identify the Kenjis and mice in their lives before the damage is done. My experience wasn't a trauma. It was market research. I turned my betrayal into a proprietary algorithm that is now worth 3 times what the original trust fund was. I did go back to Kyoto, though, 6 months after the massacre. I went to the same tea house Kenji had rented. This time, I owned the building. I sat on the tatami mats, listening to the wind in the bamboo, and I laid my mother's Mikomoto pearls on the table. They had been cleaned, restrung, and blessed at a local shrine. I realized then that Kenji was right about one thing. He did build a sanctuary for me. He built a world where I finally learned that the only person who can truly protect my legacy is me. He taught me that a system is only as strong as its most vulnerable human element, and I am no longer vulnerable. My father joined me for tea. He looked older, but there was a peace in his eyes I hadn't seen since my mother died. "You did well, Hana," he said, sipping his matcha. "You didn't just survive. You optimized." "I had a good teacher, Dad," I replied. "You always told." I went to words for the red star, the lamp where the craft music goes up, where the red star, light, dead star, Tide paint, red table, and gum for workplace. I just didn't realize the scenario would have a name and a wedding ring. We sat in silence as the sun set over the hills. I pulled out my phone and checked the morning's analytics. Sentinel Systems was trending. My bank account was a fortress. And my heart was a clean, bug-free piece of code. The wedding dress is still in my closet, but it's no longer white. I had it professionally dyed a deep obsidian black. Every year, on the anniversary of the day I didn't get married, I host a liquidation gala. I invite the lawyers, the PIs, any engineers who helped me take my life back. We toast to the truth. We toast to the logs. And we toast to the fact that in the game of life, the architect always has the home field advantage.